I'm Kerry Brox from ILP, and today's masterclass is actually going to be in two parts. So first of all, we've got David from Tribal Habits, who's a long-term member of ILP, and I'm a big fan of his work over the years and watching him, how he's progressed with his company. Today he's actually going to be showing us something that we have all been really interested in, which is showing us how we can rapidly and easily transition from face-to-face training through to online. So looking forward to that one. And then we've got a small part 2 session with Shuba from Panopto. So Shuba's going to show us, or give us a quick demo of her platform and some of the features that it has. In particular, there's a great search function for videos, which I haven't seen before. So I'm going to hand over to my co-host, who is normally in Melbourne, but today he's right here beside me. So Bill, our CEO, from all the way up from Melbourne. Sorry.
And there I am. Hello, everyone. I'm in Kerry's virtual room now. And so welcome from me as well. And what I'd also like to do is acknowledge the initial custodians of the land that we all sit on today, and pay our respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. So welcome again, everyone else. We are going to be doing a number of things today. Both David and Shuba are going to be sharing their screen with you. So one of the things I always recommend when that's going on is to put yourself into side-by-side speaker view, so that you can then enlarge the screens to get the right balance, so you're getting a feel from the speakers as well as seeing the slides. That tends to be a better way of doing things. Also, of course, if you have any questions as we're going through, please use the chat box, and we will monitor that for them and keep things going in that regard. The last thing is let's mute ourselves when we're not actually speaking, because when it is in speaker view, if anybody makes any noise in the background, suddenly you're the speaker, and that means we're not seeing the real speaker in the recordings. We are recording, of course, so that we could put this up for our members on the resources page, etc. So I think that's pretty much all it is as far as that goes. Now let me introduce why we're doing this session. And in some of the material that I put out so far, you would have seen that the beginning of the year was about getting started and motivation and the diversity subjects, etc., like that. What we're going to be doing now moving forward is very much focusing on what we see as some of the real needs of our members, and that is helping you to develop your learning offerings and how to actually build your businesses. And part of that process it'll be different things for different people. One of the things that I've been saying to people for a while now is that as we move forward, we're going to continue to see a return to some of the face-to-face workshops. We're going to see another push probably to blended programs. We also, of course, last year pivoted many of us to the virtual instructor-led program. So we're using Zoom to actually do things like this and deliver programs. And I think that's all going to be part of the mix going forward for many of us. But I think there's also going to be a stronger need for really first-class, fully online material to augment some of the stuff we're going to be doing. And I think that's the case because we're reaching a global market now. And if we don't have the offerings the way our clients are going to want them, we may miss out, particularly if people from overseas and other places start to offer that there. So it's really about flexibility, about thinking about how we can build our businesses and bring things in from a number of angles. So I was excited to get David and Shuba on for this first session, because I think they both got some really good stuff to offer us and to show what it is that we're doing. And so I'm going to turn it over to them very shortly, and I'll ask them when they come on, David, you can introduce yourself and then go forward, and then Shuba, when we bring you on, you can do the same. But I think it's one of those things that says, if we're not staying relevant, we're going to very quickly be irrelevant. The other thing about it is, if you want to build your business, you can't be fully dependent upon yourself only, whether it's face-to-face or virtual instructor-led stuff. Ultimately, to build a business, you want to be able to spread it out. And so that's where I'm hoping we're going to learn some stuff today. And as we move forward over the next few master classes, we're going to see very similar things around that approach of building the business. So David, I'd like to go ahead and turn it over to you now, if I could, my friend. And again, when David shares his screen, I recommend that you go into speaker view, and you can even turn off your videos if you choose to, although it's always nice for David to be able to see you. So I'll leave it to you to do that. David, over to you, my friend.
Yeah, thank you, Bill. And thank you for having me today and for everyone coming. Bill, always a bit dangerous asking me to introduce myself. So I will attempt to stick to the truth. So for those who haven't met me, in a previous life, I was an investment banker. You should not hold that against me. I'm a really nice, decent human being. I left investment banking and had a career for about 10 years running a training company, a training provider, where I may have met some of you along the way. And in that, we did workshops and we did a lot of virtual and we did online. And for the last 3 or 4 years, I've been running an Australian-based online learning platform for corporates and for training providers. So I've kind of touched everything that there is here with training. Today, I'm going to share my screen and do some PowerPoint slides. Yes, death by PowerPoint via a webinar. I'll try and keep that reasonably short. It's just going to help give some structure to the initial part of the discussion. Then I'm going to share my screen in a live practical demonstration of some online training bits and bobs. There's a lot of people on today's call, so I'm going to ask that if you've got questions, please ask them, but probably the chat box is the best place to do that to start with. It is a live session. Please hit me up for any questions that you've got in chat. And Bill, if there's a question there, or Kerry, there's a question there that I'm not answering, I just haven't seen it, so feel free just to jump in and say there's a question there and I'll get to that. Okay, let's do the magic of Zoom. Groovy. Hopefully you can see my screen has turned into PowerPoint slides. There we go. And today I'm going to be focusing on this concept of converting workshops into online training. And so what I'm really talking about here is where you've got something that was largely instructor-led, so facilitated. So it could be a classic workshop, but it also could be a webinar. It could actually be virtual facilitation. It could also be paper-based material that you've been delivering. So it could be an induction program that's an induction workbook that you email out to people, or it's some sort of physical document that people have been using. In other words, it lacks a digital belief or a digital existence, and it's some sort of paper or offline thing that we're doing. And over the last 12 months in our platform, but I think generally across businesses, we saw about 10 years worth of digital transformation accelerate into about 6 months, when organizations, as a result of COVID, suddenly realized that actually, if I don't have any options other than workshops, I could be in trouble in delivering content. And so we've seen a lot of organizations have to rapidly transform this content into online learning. And essentially in the next 45 minutes, I'm going to try and distill what we've learned through that process over the last 12 months for you. We've also helped a lot of organizations do that. And to make it work from our side, we've had to be very methodical about it to keep it cost effective and fast. So we've really just tried to come up with what's the shortest process from A to B to get from that workshops into online. And to do that, I'm going to go through 6 steps today. So hopefully you can see those on my screen. We're going to talk about defining what the objective is, what we're trying to achieve, defining the ROI, a critical step that most people skip, deciding the process of conversion, how to prepare your offline content for online conversion, scoping the smallest possible conversion, another step that's often skipped. And then I'll screen share and we'll do the actual converting bit. And I'll actually show you in an online tool what workshop-based activities look like when they become online. And I'm going to pick the 10 most common workshop activities I see, or kind of instructor-led activities I see in facilitators guides and in workshops, and how we repurpose those exact same techniques in an online environment. So we're trying not to reinvent the wheel too much. We're trying to keep it perhaps good instructional design from a workshop and just rebuild it in an online way. I'm just going to open the chat box on my screen, which doesn't want to open. So I will just get Kerry and Bill to jump in if for some reason there's chat there that I can't see. The first thing I'm going to start with actually is step 0, and we are going to use chat a little bit for that. Step 0 is the fact that I'm not here to say that online is better than workshop. And I'm not actually here to say one is better than the other, in fact. I think they're just both different opportunities. They're both tools in your arsenal. And the first thing I want to do when I'm converting from a workshop to online is not to lose what's good about a workshop. I want to keep the things that we like about a workshop that makes workshops successful. And I want to recreate that in online rather than ignore it or punish it or somehow think that online is better. So just as a bit of a warm up for everybody, I am going to get you to jump into the chat box and just put in one item per chat. So the chat box will get quite busy. What is it we like about workshops? What's the good stuff that makes workshops effective that we perhaps want to keep when we are thinking about going into online? So it's all the stuff that we like that we want to keep. I'm just going to stop sharing so I can see the chat box here for a minute. So I'm kind of looking for, yeah, informal chatting, excellent. Peer interaction, body language, interaction again, excellent. These are the things that we like. That's what makes workshops powerful. Oh, the light in people's eyes. There's a very deep and meaningful. I like that.
So pleased no one's putting morning tea or afternoon tea.
That's right, the food. Hey, look, there's nothing wrong with saying I get out of the office. It gets me out of my office. That's a good thing about workshops. Ability interaction, see if there. Check comprehension is a good one from Schuber. I like that. Hands-on activities. These are all good things that we like in workshops. And our challenge is to keep these things when we move to online. And so things I'd written down before you're answering and keep coming in. Yep. Yeah. Energy in the room, bouncing ideas of each other. So I'm seeing a lot of that interactional learning from each other, which I like. I like the reflection part where perhaps I'm not seeing something in the learning, but one of my participants in the workshop with me says something that gets me to understand it from their perspective, and that multiple perspective kind of unlocks a new thought from me. Yeah, Irene said being able to move around in the space, that's important too. We'll talk a little bit about what that means for online today. Conversation, yep. I'm also thinking about maybe sharing some future decisions. So one of the things in workshops I can do is try to make some commitments, and I'm making that in front of people. So there's a little bit of accountability perhaps with my workshop participants about changes that I want to make. Small group work. I want to keep all of these things. These are all good things. And ideally, I don't want to jettison them in the process of moving to online. So I want to keep that thought in our mind when we get to the last step where we're recreating things and we want to see how can we capture that stuff and keep it in the online environment. So let's begin. Step one, we need to define the objective. And this is a very important decision, which most people, I think, take for granted before they start this conversion process. And so the question is quite simple. Why are we converting workshops to online? And the answer to this question will be very important when it comes to defining the objectives. Since you've done a very good job in chat, we're going to actually stay in chat again. And I'm going to get you to jump into chat and just have a think for a moment and think, why would you need to convert workshop content into online? It might be you actually have that problem right now. And so you can tell us about your current situation. Or maybe you're not dealing with this issue right at the moment. So it might be more of a case of why do you think other people are doing this or what you've observed in other people? But why do we need to kind of think about this? What's the driver behind it? And I'm just going to stop sharing again because Zoom doesn't want to show me anything in chat when I'm screen sharing. Okay, to reach people overseas or interstate. So that's a scaling issue. Yep. COVID or social distancing. Can't travel overseas. Minimize travel. So we've got some scaling issues here. So we're moving into online to get better reach, get better scale. Kim's saying reduce budgets. Yep, that's going to be important too. Online training tends to be a more cost-effective delivery method. Adele's got an interesting point there, a blended approach. So that's an interesting point. It may be that actually we're not looking to replace a workshop. We're only looking to replace part of a workshop. Maybe some of the theory to take it out of a workshop, or maybe some of the posts. So it's not a full replacement. So some of this is a full replacement. Some of it is an alternative for people who can't travel right at the moment. Some of it's blended. Some of it's just for budget. Preferred way of working. Yep. Yeah, room sizes and economies of scale. So I kind of tend to think here, I can summarize what you've written into 4 major things. One is it's a full replacement. So we're going to eliminate the workshop and have an online version instead. That would define one set of objectives in the conversion. The workshop will no longer exist when the conversion is finished. One's an alternative. So the workshop will continue to exist when the conversion's finished, but now people have alternative delivery methods. One's blended. So we're going to eliminate part of the workshop and move it online, maybe for better preparation or better follow-up. Or it could be it's a tease is a 4th one where you're delivering, particularly if you're a training provider, you might be delivering the start of something online. And so it's a bit of a business development thing. If people like that, they like your way of delivering, they like your content, they then might sign up for a more serious interaction with you afterwards in a form of a more serious workshop. And all of the things that you've mentioned here about cost and scale, that's typically either the replacement or alternative version. These decisions are quite important when it comes to setting up your objective. And when it comes to thinking of your objective, once you've decided why you're doing it, I think of 4 things. I want to define the scope. there's obviously a big difference in scope between replacing an entire workshop and doing blended learning. It's also going to help me create hard edges. So hard edges, if you've been to any of my sessions before, are one of my favorite terms when it comes to instructional design. And a hard edge means when I'm thinking about a particular interaction or a bit of training, what is the hard edge of where certain content begins and ends? So it's a very defined scope of content. For the learner, I'm essentially thinking of schemas or chunking with very hard edges. When they start this interaction or start this module, they will cover this certain amount of information and it will clearly finish there. I won't leave them halfway through a thought, halfway through a concept, half finished in something, but I can create very hard edges to the content. I can also define success to know if this conversion was worthwhile or if it's working, because now I've defined the objective. And so certainly if we're looking at a replacement for workshops, the success criteria, the evaluation questions we ask might be quite different if it's a blended workshop and we're trying to figure out, did it work as a replacement or not? And it's also going to define the data capture that we want as we go through. So blended learning will have very different data capture to replacement, because with blended learning, we might be looking to capture certain information to pass on to a facilitator who's then going to use in a workshop. And then we're going to capture data at the back end when people are implementing. By clearly defining the objective, I can get the answers to these 4 things. And we're going to need them later when it comes to that practical part. Once I have my objectives kind of set, the next thing is to determine my return on investment. I see a lot of people skip this, and it's a shame because they end up in kind of a no man's land. They can end up in the situation where they're doing the conversion, but they're no longer sure if it's a good idea or if they're spending the appropriate amount of time or if it worked. And so with ROI, here's what I'm thinking. We've got to consider the return on the investment. What do we get out of it? And then we've got to consider the investment itself, which is the effort to do this. So some of you might be looking at a 60-page facilitator's guide or 70 PowerPoint slides that define your workshop, thinking, moving this into online is work. I have to sit down and figure this out and do it, and it's effort. That's the investment bit. If you've defined your objective, it becomes easier to define the return. And that return should then dictate the level of effort or investment you're willing to make, because there's no point having a negative ROI. So I'll give you some examples of that. Let's say all of your existing policies are in PDF documents. And the way people get policies, employees get policies, is they go somewhere and they get a handout of PDF documents which are printed for them, or they go to some folder and they read them there. So you're thinking what we want to do is get them into online. And you might think, well, the easiest, all I really want them to do is have a single source of truth. I want them in one spot, and I just want to be able to record, did someone access the policy and tick they've read it? So my return is quite simple. It's just a single source of truth and a quick acceptance that I did it. Since that return is quite small, the investment can't be very big either. So in this case, you might say, actually in the conversion in this case, we're not even going to convert the content. We're just going to have a file that literally allows them to download the module and then tick a box to say they've read it. And that's a really small effort, a really small investment. But when put next to that really small return, the ROI is totally acceptable. Alternatively, you might have a 60-minute webinar that you've recorded and you want to make it available to people afterwards, but they're not going to pay to look at it. It's just extra information you're giving them, or maybe it's some opportunistic learning. So there's no real monetary return if you're a seller, and it's not necessarily compulsory training. Again, the return's quite low. So the investment here may not be to convert that 60-minute workshop into fully interactive learning. It might just be to take the video, cut it into 5 pieces, and have 5 10-minute videos that people can watch, and you can track that they've done that. And in that case, actually, that's totally acceptable because that's your return and that's the investment that it supports. Or you may have a 2-hour workshop that you need to distribute to 50 staff across Australia. And this subject matter is quite serious. It's very important they understand it. Maybe it's some sort of internal processes that they can't afford to get wrong, or it's some compliance training that they must understand. Okay, this is getting a bit more serious. The return now is quite substantial. And in addition, we're saving a lot of travel costs. We're saving facilitators. We're saving room hire. So actually the return is going to be quite significant. So I could justify a much more serious investment and spend the time doing a more serious conversion. So I think if you think about thinking what's my return going to be? It's going to help you justify what's the correct investment. Because in converting to online training, it doesn't all need to be paying $2,000 for a subscription to Articulate Storyline and spending 30 hours building a bespoke bit of training. That may be an appropriate investment for a certain sort of return. I think we also need to keep in mind that training iterates quite significantly. I imagine you've all been in the same situation I have if you've written a training course where you think, oh, it's perfect, it's done. Only to realize after running the training course, there's 6 changes that you can make. And indeed, I don't know about you, but I find my training courses are never finished. I'm constantly iterating on them. And so if that's the case, I don't want to overinvest at the start. And that's what I'll talk about in step 5, is starting with the smallest possible conversion and then allowing that iterative improvement process to improve the ROI over time. Next, we need to decide the process. So now we have kind of a defined objective, and we've kind of got our hard edges. We've understood what success looks like, the data that we want to capture, and we've decided what's the return we're going to get from this and what's an appropriate amount of input we're willing to put in to get a good ROI. Step 3 is then to decide the process. And actually, this is quite a simple step, which only takes a few seconds to think about, but it can be an important one in certain situations. Your first option is a one-stage conversion. This occurs when your existing materials are in really good shape, or you are the subject matter expert. So you are doing the conversion yourself and you know the knowledge inside and out. In other words, you can go straight from whatever you've got to building it online. Sometimes though, you need a 2-stage conversion. And that's because the materials you've got in the workshop aren't actually in good enough shape to convert, or you're not the subject matter expert, somebody else is, but you're doing the conversion process yourself. And so you need better content. And this is a problem we encounter a lot. Someone will say, I've got 60 PowerPoint slides in a workshop that I need to turn into online training. And we'll look at them and you can't actually convert those 60 PowerPoint slides because some of the slides are just a picture of a dog, which is a meaningless bit of conversion. It meant something to the facilitator who was delivering it because they knew what to talk about it with that dog. It was some metaphor, I guess, or story. But when I look at it in isolation, I can't really understand what I'm supposed to do with it. And often there's just not enough detail there. It's trapped in the mind of the facilitator. Or there'll be a simple instruction in the facilitator's guide which says, explain the process. But it doesn't actually have that written down. If you're the subject matter expert, you can do that in the one-stage conversion. But if not, you might need this other stage where you actually need to enhance and improve your offline materials first. And actually, that can be a really good investment of time. Because the choice here is you don't do that, in which case when we get to step 6 and we're doing the conversion, that step's going to take a lot longer because you're going to be working with poor quality content that's not detailed enough. So you're going to do an investment either way. You're either going to stop now and improve your content here in step 3 until it's detailed enough to get into an online format, or you're going to be slowed down when you get to step 6 and do the actual conversion. Usually it's better to do it here and get it already here, and then step 6 kind of flies through when you get to it. Finally, we're at the point of then preparing the content. So that's kind of the interesting bit now. So we're getting into the practical bit. So I can't see chat on my screen at the moment, but I'm going to let Bill and Kerry jump in if there are questions there that I haven't answered on those first 3 steps. But a lot of those first 3 steps are planning. It's understanding what we're doing, defining that ROI, and then figuring out how we're going to go ahead. So Kerry, you can give me a thumbs up. I can see it on your screen, or you can let me know if there's any questions there. All good? Excellent. Let's talk about then preparing the content. So now we're into the practical bit. So if you have no e-learning experience, this is where we're going to start to give you a lot of help. If you've got e-learning experience, we're going to give you perhaps some additional structure here. And on this page, I'm not going to talk about whether we should use a quiz or a poll or templates or whatever. That's going to come later. This is just about getting the structure right. And I find it's very helpful for people thinking about conversion if I give you a framework of how to structure content. And I'm going to think about it in chunking. So if you're an instructional designer, you'll be familiar with the concept of chunking. Essentially, I want to think about how can I chunk up all this workshop content into little pieces and then assemble those pieces into online training. And so I'm going to give you 5 levels of chunking. And the first level is called an element. So an element is an individual online interaction. So it could be some paragraphs of text. It might be a quiz. It might be an image, a video, some tabs, some flip cards, something the learner has to upload, a poll they have to vote on, something they have to download, a question they have to answer. It's an individual little bit of content. And as you get good at this, I'm able to look at a workbook, and I'll show you this in practice soon. I'm able to look at a workbook and look at something and go, that's going to be some tabs. That's going to be flip cards. That's going to be polls. That's where I am doing the lowest level of chunking, taking existing content and seeing what chunk does it fit into in online. And I think a lot of people rush to this, and what they end up with is just a huge stream of these chunks in a row. And I see this when I get that online learning that's like death by PowerPoint. It's 200 slides I have to click through online. Each slide has one of these elements on it, and it's a click fest just getting through it. There's no overall cohesion to the way it's laid out.
David, we just had a quick question in regards to what are tabs?
Oh, so tabs, I'll actually show you some tabs when we get going, but tabs or flip cards would be forms of interactive text. You've probably seen tabs in an online website where it has a box and it has 4 tabs at the top with labels on it. And as you click on a tab, you'll see some videos, text, images, content. And when you click on another tab, it'll show you different text or content. So you could be clicking on tabs to get different definitions for things or steps in a process. It's just a way to kind of chunk up content. I'll actually show you an example of that a bit later. When you're thinking about elements, that's the smallest piece. We need to bundle things up in online training. So the next chunk is called a section. And a section is a bundle of 3 to 6 elements on a single part of a key point. So you might think of sections as being like section headings. So when I'm looking at a workbook, I might see maybe a page and a half in a workbook, and there might be a title at the top of the page, which is the title of what I would call the section. And underneath it, I might see in my mind a few elements. I might see there's going to be some text to introduce something. Then there's a few flip cards to explain those definitions. And then there's maybe an FAQ that's going to be at the end. So we're bundling things up into a section. And a section should have hard edges. A section explains clearly a defined part of a key point. And ideally, I bundle up my sections into a point. And so then I bundle up 3 to 6 sections into a key point. And so you can kind of see here, I'm building up. I'm starting with little elements, bundle them into a section, bundle a few sections into a point. And that point's like a chapter in a book. It's a defined hard edge of this is what you're going to learn when you explore this point. You'll go through these sections. These sections contain these elements. And this framework, I think, makes it easier for you to say, right, I've got to take this workshop content, think about the smallest possible elements to translate bit, bundle them into sections, bundle them into points, and then I bundle my points into a module. So 1 to 10 points becomes a module on a defined topic. Personally, David likes to have his modules between 15 and 60 minutes of online content. I think that's enough. I think less than 15 minutes is a little short. I think it's hard for someone to really fully engage in something when it's over that quick. When someone sits down at their computer, they haven't had the advantage of traveling to a workshop, clearing their mind, getting out of their working space. They are sitting down in their working environment with distractions around them. And it can take them 3, 4, or 5 minutes to get into an online learning module. If that online learning module is over in 10 minutes, often they just don't get into it. It's just kind of all happened a bit quick. 60 minutes, I think, is a bit getting kind of like the limit. I think after 60 minutes, they should have learned a lot. I can teach you a lot in 60 minutes. And I think that's a good point to have a hard edge and finish. And at that point, we might then have assessments or on-the-job activities or whatever it is. It's enough for them to take a break, to clear their mind before moving on to the next thing. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, 60-minute modules ain't going to cut it. I got an 8-hour workshop. What am I going to do? And that's the final chunking called a pathway, where you bundle up 2 to 10 modules around a defined journey. So in my mind, I could be looking at your 8-hour workshop thinking that's a pathway that's going to consist of 5 or 6 modules. So each module will be 15 to 60 minutes. Each of those modules is going to have 1 to 10 points covering the specific components of that module. Each point's going to have 3 to 6 sections explaining that point. And inside each section, there will be 3 to 6 elements explaining that little bit. And this chunking process is good for the learner because it helps them build frameworks and schemas in their mind and understand things. But it's really good for you as the conversion because you can chunk up the conversion. You can say, okay, I'll just start by building this bit and now I can build that bit. And you feel the feeling of progress as you're doing the conversion as well. And when I get to step 5 next, having hard edges, knowing when this module starts and this module finishes, or this point starts and this point finishes, makes this conversion process manageable. It makes it into a series of smaller activities rather than one really massive undertaking. With that in mind, then we can now start getting into action. And my general advice to anyone who hasn't done this before is to start with the smallest possible thing you can convert. So we will take the smallest part of your workshop. Maybe that's the introduction, but it may not be. It might be another bit. And we will do that and then launch that, get some feedback, even if you're just trialing it with people. So we're going to look at your objectives, make sure we've clearly defined our objectives, got our hard edges, understand why we're doing it, defined our ROI, prepared our content, and we're thinking about chunking it into these 5 types of bundled chunks, and we're ready to begin. And at that point, we can then start the conversion bit. And so the rest of today's session is going to be me demonstrating some live changes where I'm going to take these 10 common things I see happen in workshops or instructor-led training and think about, okay, how can I rebuild them in an online format using the elements and points and sections that we spoke about, and in a way where I retain as much of those things that you liked about workshops up front, all of that learning from each other or reflecting on things or sharing content, learning all of that, keeping all of that stuff as well. To do that, I need to change my screen. So I'm just going to switch over to a live online module. And I'm going to use this module here, which I built just for this discussion with you today. And it's called Workshops into Online. I didn't think too hard about the topic. And I'm going to look at the 10 things that I showed you earlier. I'm going to group them into things that tend to happen early in a workshop or early in instructor-led training, things that kind of happen during the meet or the discussion phases, and then things that happen towards the end or after a workshop. And we're just going to work our way slowly. So we're going to begin here in the early part. And I'm going to look at 3 things: icebreakers, what to do about workshop lectures, and what to do about current state polling. And I'm actually calling icebreakers because you should not have icebreakers in online training. So you can save yourself some conversion time here. Often I come into a workshop or webinar and facilitator runs some icebreakers, and you just don't need to in online training. Here's 4 great reasons why you shouldn't. Workshops have teamwork, and so we need to build relationships between team members. Well, even here in the online training where I show you peer-to-peer learning, it's not really teamwork. We don't need to build those relationships. Equally, we don't need to really build a relationship with a facilitator through an icebreaker. The exception to that would be if the facilitator is going to be a personality in your online training. So if you are going to be a presence, an avatar, or you are important, then you may want to start with a quick video of yourself, introducing yourself as a little icebreaker. Hey, this is me. Here's a few things about me, just to build a little bit of screen relationship with your learners. Often workshops have icebreakers to help people deal with nerves of being in a public environment, but we don't have that problem here. Or sometimes workshops just need to pad time. And so icebreakers are a classic way to pad time. Now, I'm a bit brutal on that one, but sometimes the effort of getting everyone to fly in or drive in means the workshop really does need to run for 2 hours to justify that. And if you've only got 90 minutes of content, then you need 30 minutes of padding, and icebreakers are good for that. We don't need to pad time in online training. In fact, usually the opposite. So we can just skip all the icebreakers and get to it. That being said, earlier I said that sometimes when people sit down in their seat at work, it takes them a little while to get going. So sometimes we may want to start our training on online a little easily, or with some activities that engage them to kind of get them going, but aren't icebreakers in the classic sense. And the classic one I do for that, for online, is current state polling. So this is where you're in a workshop and the facilitator says, everybody raise your hand if you do the following, or raise your hand if you've had this problem, or Fred, can you tell me about what you're doing here? Or who's been having this issue? Or turn to the person beside you and talk about the challenges you're getting. In other words, talk about your current state. We're kind of sharing information with each other. The facilitator is getting a sense of the class and we're gathering some important data. So we can do that in online in a couple of different ways. I'm going to use a poll here. And the topic I'm using today is about the Kirkpatrick levels of training evaluation. Seems relevant for the audience. Forget what the poll is. It's a poll asking people, what do they currently do, or how often do they use Kirkpatrick level 3? Or I'm going to say never, it's quite difficult, and save. And having voted, I can see a few other people have done this poll before me, and I can see where I'm sitting versus my peers. So that's just like the facilitator asking me, I've answered, and now I'm seeing how many other hands are raised. I could have been asked a question though. So here I'm being asked, what's the #1 challenge I have with training evaluations? And I'm going to say, remembering to hand them out in all my workshops. So this is me like talking to the person beside me or talking out loud to the facilitator. And so I'm going to answer that. And now what I'm seeing is the answers that other people have given. So other learners who have completed this part of the online learning have answered this question and are now reflecting on how they've answered it. So I'm seeing the answers that they've given here. And so I'm kind of easing my way into the training, but we're keeping that peer-to-peer sharing. In both cases here, I'm learning from my peers and seeing what they're up to and having that opportunity to get that peer-to-peer or social learning. Of course, the beautiful thing in online is this is all data that's captured by the platform, not lost in the moment in the workshop. So this could be used by the facilitator or organization later as useful data. I could also get people to upload stuff. So in this online interaction, I'm asking them to upload their existing workshop evaluation sheets. This could be used in blended learning when you want people to provide a whole bunch of stuff that the facilitator is going to review before the workshop. So I'm using this as a data gathering exercise to get stuff to hand on to the facilitator. Now I'm going to move at a fairly rapid clip today. As you see, we've got lots of kind of hands-on stuff to cover here. Feel free to keep asking questions as we're going, or I'll try and leave us a bit of time for some questions at the end too. Next thing I'm going to cover that's in workshops that you have to convert is a lecture. So this is where the facilitator says, I need to teach you some stuff. And I think this worries a lot of people in the conversion because they worry they're going to end up with pages of text. They worry about dealing with large amounts of text-based content. So let's get one thing out of the way. There's nothing wrong with text-based content. We read a lot. It's a really nice way to communicate and for people to absorb information. We just need to, change the variety up and not overuse it. So I'm not afraid of using text. I just want to use it in a good way. Although there are some other ways to deal with lectures too. So let's just think about those times in workshops where the facilitator's guide says, explain the following process or talk about this thing. They're lecturing. So I'm going to just get some lecture. Here's a lecture. It's explaining the 4 levels of the Kirkpatrick evaluation model. Doesn't matter what it is, but imagine a facilitator explaining all this in a workshop or webinar. I need to transform this into online format. First thing I could do is use some interactive text. So interactive text is where I create some physical movement with the text. So they can't just sit at the screen and read it with their arms crossed. They have to engage it in some way. Ideally, I want to link the physical movement to reinforce whatever I'm explaining. So to create some linkage between the way it's laid out and the content itself. And I'm going to chunk up the text to reduce the cognitive load on the learner. Because let's face it, if you get to this section, it's got all that content, some people are like, oh boy, it's a lot of content. And they might start to skim read or read a bit fast. So let's chunk it up for them. So here's some examples. Here is an accordion interaction. So in this case here, I've got the same 4 paragraphs that you saw above. I've just put them into an interaction now where they have a heading. I've just put in an image from a stock library and I've reformatted the text to make it a bit easier to read, but it is the same content. Except you can only see one part of the content at a time. So I'm reducing that pressure on the learner by just letting them focus on this. Now they focus on this. Now they focus on that. And indeed, this particular layout accordion is quite nice when there's a linear flow, like steps or levels here. I think it works quite well. And they can go back and kind of look at information as they want to. And so by this here, I'm linking interaction with learning. I can also force them to click on all the tabs so that they definitely read everything, which slows down skim reading. Here are buttons. I actually don't have tabs here for me today. Tabs would be along the top. Buttons, same content, but now laid out as buttons. Or indeed, same content again, but now we're laid out as flip cards. Flip cards are a really interesting interaction for me because you can't see what's on the front of the card while you read the back. So it kind of has interesting learning implications. So here they're kind of questions with answers on the back, but they could be definitions or they could be scenarios. And so it's just a way for people to interact. And in this case here, I have literally copied out of my workbook this information into a template to get it into online. And I've just kind of made it a bit more interactive, but reduced that cognitive load on people. It's still written material, just done in a more interesting way. You can also use video for lectures. So you could take a talking headshot like this one here. We are literally looking into the camera and talking. I generally recommend online learning videos should be no longer than 10 minutes. I actually prefer shorter. I actually think 5 minutes is better, 5 minutes per video. That's enough information for someone to take in before they move on and do something else. They're also much easier to record and prepare because if something goes wrong, it's only 5 minutes to fix it. Video, though, does require you to be a good presenter. So, you need to be talking well and emotive, and you need some recording equipment. They're a bit of a hassle to edit, but they are appropriate at times, particularly for very emotive or complex content. A halfway house is a narration, which will be our final way of dealing with a lecture. So a narration is where we're going to take the content and we're going to turn it into slides, and there'll be a voiceover explaining the slides. So you can do that in PowerPoint. If you didn't realize that, you can actually set up some PowerPoints, and PowerPoint has built-in slideshow narration recording. It will record your voice and it'll record you moving through your slides and export it as a video, and you could upload that into your online learning. In this case here, we've just built this in this particular platform. So you can't hear it, but there's an AI voice that's reading out this script while this slide is on here. And I can move through it like a video. Essentially, I'm just copying and pasting the paragraphs of text to make them the script, and then I'm writing a little slide, or I could have put some images up here for the slide. In either way, I've very quickly, just using text, essentially created a video in a few seconds. But all three of these give me the option to give a lecture. I'm taking that content part of a workshop or a document, and I've just turned it through interactive text, through a video or through a narration into the online equivalent. And that's most of the stuff that happens early in a workshop where we're transferring information over. We're doing all of that transfer of information. As the workshop progresses, you'll encounter things which are much more interactive. And so we're going to switch into what happens during the middle or later parts of a workshop where the facilitator is running activities. And you're hitting these activities and you're like, what do we do now in online? So essentially, I want to rebuild as many of these activities as I can. So we'll begin with long answer questions. This is when the facilitator says, okay, who could tell me about this? What's the answer to this? How do you respond to that? The facilitator is looking for group discussion at this point. And so we could do the same thing here. We could ask someone a question and get them to type in an answer. Of course, the difference here is in a workshop, usually only 1 or 2 people answer. Of course, in online, everyone's going to answer. So there's actually a higher level of interaction in some respect. Everyone coming to this point has to answer this question. I've got a great little tool here in Google, which creates corporate Ipsum, which lets me fill in forms with garbage words real quick, which I've done. It looks real until you read it. But let's say that's my answer to this question. I'm going to lock in my answer. And now I'm getting some feedback, some prepared feedback to my answer. So this interaction is just like the facilitator saying, hey, what do you do now? A participant going, well, I do this. And the facilitator going, oh, that's awesome. Hey, let me ask you some questions. You should think about that. Or are you doing these things, or have you thought about it? That's the same sort of pattern we would see in a facilitator interaction, just rebuilt here in the learning environment that's online, except we're doing it with every single learner as they come through, not just the extroverts who are willing to speak up in a workshop. The other thing you might see facilitators do are some review quizzes. This is fairly straightforward, but it's where the facilitator reads the room and says, let's just stop and review what we've done. So can everyone tell me the 4 levels of Kirkpatrick stuff and get them in the right order? I'll just have a quick guess at them here and lock in my answer. Oh no, I got that wrong. I better see what the correct answer was. Yeah, that's it. Okay, good. Oh yes, level 4 evaluations. So I'm just using this as a chance to do some online learning, not an assessment, a chance just to calibrate or check that they understood. So just reflecting that part where the facilitator says, hey, everybody stop and let's just talk about things. Kerry, I think we had a question in chat.
Yeah, we had one, which is...
Kerry, you're just in... Oh, hang on a second. Just start again, Kerry. Sorry, I had my speakers off.
Okay, no worries. Just one quick question. What do you do to add narrative to a PowerPoint?
Yeah, so you can do it one of two ways. If you're in PowerPoint, you will have to read it out yourself. So essentially PowerPoint has a record slideshow function where you can plug in your microphone and hit slideshow and hit record, and then just talk and page yourself through your slides, and then hit stop, and it will export the whole thing as a video with your voiceover through your slides as you go through. And then you can just put that straight up. In a platform like Tribal Habits, we have a built-in narration tool which will do that. It doesn't even have to be your voice. You can just write the script. And we have 5 AI voices through Amazon, same technology that runs Alexa, that'll read out your stuff for you. The beauty of that is that you can just change any word in the script and it instantly changes the narration. You don't have to re-record anything. Oh, Kerry, now you're in mute.
Sorry, lots of background noise here. We just had one more in relation to choosing a platform. Can you please provide us some insights into online course marketplaces, learning management systems, and online course websites, software and plugins, and what you would recommend to get started?
Yeah, that's a really loaded question for me, Kerry. I'm sure you can appreciate that, given we have a learning platform. So obviously come and check out Tribal Habits. I think putting aside all the propaganda and answering that massive question in as fewer words as I can, I think you need to think about what your primary objective is. Some platforms are fantastic at marketing online learning, but their training creation tools are garbage. When your students get in there, it's basically just pages of text and the odd quiz. So the experience for learners is terrible, which I think can hurt. Other platforms are fantastic at creating online training, but aren't going to have any e-commerce or sales gateway. I think probably propaganda alert, we head more in that direction because we think there's a million sites out there that are good at selling stuff. And it's kind of a best of breed thing. So it's kind of hard to answer that question in short because it's quite a complex one. Kerry, I think we have more questions coming in.
Yeah, a couple of more coming in now. What about feedback on their long answer responses?
Yeah, so a couple of ways of dealing with that. In a good platform, you can assess that. So they can give the answer and then you can have it so that once they finished all their answering, an assessor can jump in and do it. Sometimes feedback actually isn't needed. It's just there to get them thinking, and the feedback is the feedback you give them. So in this case here, I actually don't care what they wrote in some respects. I care that they wrote something and had a go, and then they will self-assess. They're adults. I will give them my preferred answer here and they can compare it to theirs, and that's enough. The only time I really need to give them feedback is if it's an assessment, or alternatively, I would get an assessor to come in or a coach and do that. So in our platform, for example, we can have their answer sent to a coach or a facilitator who, if they want to, can send them an email with some feedback on their answers. Kerry, I think we've opened the floodgates on questions. Hit me up. What else we got? No,
the other one I could actually answer myself, which is tell us the website for your platform. So I've answered Tribal Habits.
Oh, excellent. I love it, Kerry. I'll push on a little bit longer and then we'll do a few more questions in a bit. The next thing I want to look at is more of the reflection learning. So this is when the facilitator says, let's stop the workshop now and let's just talk about what we've done. Form into little groups and talk about things, or turn to the neighbor beside you and talk about this. In any case, I want participants talking with each other. I want to step out of the discussion. And so we can use a reflection-based activity to do that. So in this case here, I'm being asked, what's a point I really enjoyed in this part? I like this question because it forces me to go back up and see what we've covered so I can go back down and answer it. So I'm going to say I loved learning about level 3 evaluations and how to make them practical. That might have been my answer, and I'll share that. And at this point, I'm seeing what other people said, but there's a difference now. In this particular interaction, everyone was asked a different question. So I was asked, what's the point you enjoyed? But the person before me was asked, what's a point I can use on the job? And the person before them was asked, what's an important point for you? So there's a random series of questions being asked here. So now I get a little moment of surprise and delight as the learner. I'm now not only learning from my peers and what they typed in, I'm seeing that they had different questions to begin with. And so this is like me now in a little asynchronous discussion, a little putting time aside, discussion with my peers, what are they seeing, learning from them, getting that interaction with them. So I'm keeping that feeling of, I'm not doing this on my own. There are artifacts of people who are here before me and what they learned. Equally, I might be asked, what issues, this is a poll, what issues do I ask on a typical level 1 evaluation? I might say I put these things on my happy sheets and vote. And I'm getting the polling results here. So I'm seeing what other people are doing at this point as a chance to reflect. So in both cases, I'm feeling like I'm not here by myself. Other people are answering questions. They answered at a different time, but we've answered it together in the same environment, and I'm learning from that. This is an interesting interaction where we're allowing people who have experience with the topic to contribute knowledge to the topic. So this is where the facilitator says to the class, okay, what are you guys doing to solve this problem? If you've got experience with it, contribute it. It's an actual chance for user-generated content. And in this case here, it's an optional activity. And people who've got experience in this case, in this topic we're talking about, can add in examples of what they do. And I can see 2 previous learners did. They've added in those examples here. And I've got the option to share something myself and share an example of my own and put that in. So now I'm really getting to the point of getting people teaching each other, not just learning from each other, by giving them the option to do that and trusting my audience as they go through it. I quite like this idea here. I'm going to favorite that for later, which is just me sending a little signal to other learners that I thought this information was important. We can also go through online scenarios, which is where the same sort of thing as a facilitator does, runs a case study. Let's take what we've got and apply it. So in this case here, I've got, talking about some scenario down here I've set up with Samantha running a workshop, and I've got an open question about how they should answer it. And I love my little thing up here that can generate some content for me to answer. So I'm having a little, how would I do it? Oh, here's what you should have done. Here's how you should have answered. Let's let the scenario continue with the next part of the scenario. And what do you think Samantha should do now? I think she should do these things. Got one wrong, one right. And here's the feedback on it. That is just like the facilitator running a case study or scenario and getting people to work their way through it. In all cases, it was reasonably easy for me to take that information and that existed in a workshop, and using those little elements we spoke about, turn them into little elements and then bundle those elements together. So if we go back and look at part 1, we can see here's a section consisting of an image and a list. Here's a new section, and it has a poll and it has a reflection element and an upload. So this is the chunking. Here's a section, here are the elements, an image, some text, some more text. Here's another section. This was all the bundling up that we did earlier. I'm running out of time, so I'm going to move to the end of a workshop. So at the end of a workshop, I'm now thinking about practical outcomes, people moving on. Maybe we break into small groups to do some more serious activities or implement stuff, or maybe we make some decisions for the future. I can do this all online fairly easily too. We've looked at the Q&A thing before, but we're going to change it up slightly. I'm asking people to describe how they're going to make change. How are they going to change their level 1 assessment? And let's say they type in an answer. So this is like them in a workbook at the end of a workshop, writing down what they want to do differently. The difference here, though, is that we've captured that information and we've put it in their digital workbook. So in this case here, there's a journal that's been building up here on the side, and it's capturing their information and things that they're doing. And here in part 3, it's captured what they want to do later on. So they've essentially got a digital workbook where they've added that in. They can email it to themselves or PDF it up. But it's the same experience as having that paper workbook and writing down what they want to do. Because it's digital though, we can always email it to them, send it to their coach, use it as data, share it with a facilitator. But it's them going through that same thing where the facilitator says, what are you going to do? Here's what I'm going to do. Great, let's get that in your workbook and make some change. They could do the same with a poll. Pick from these things that you want to do. Oh, I want to do level 4 first. Again, I can see what my peers are up to. And that particular answer that I just gave got copied up into my journal. So it's kind of data that I can use later on when I'm on the job. If you have an actual workbook or templates or things you want to give them in online training because you're handing those out. So this is like handouts in a workshop. Well, they're very easy to do. You can usually add files and they can download that stuff either before or after. So handouts are very easy to replicate. I'm going to finish with 2 real quick things. I'm just going to go very tight for time. One is on the job activities or implementation. So this is when you're in a workshop and the facilitator says, all right, workshop's over, let's get some stuff done. break into small groups or work by yourself for 30 minutes and get something done. And they give you a task to do. You can do that online as well. There's actually no reason. It's just a series of tasks. I'm going to give someone a task here. So their first activity in this particular module is they have to implement a new level 1 evaluation. They've got 14 days to do it, and it should take them about 60 minutes. Here's the task instructions. And when they click this button, they were sent an email with that information, and a 14-day countdown began. And if we wanted to, we could have tagged stakeholders involved in that, like a coach or a facilitator. I am literally doing exactly what happens in a workshop, giving instructions, giving them some time to do it. And then I'm going to ask them to come back and tell me how they did it. So when they come back, they can share how they went, and they can type in some feedback about the results they got. Kerry, I'm going to run short of time. I'm happy to actually call it there. And what I might do is at the end of the session, hang around, and I can go through anything else anyone else wants to go. But just while I'm here, do we have any other questions that I haven't answered as we get to the end of my time?
There's just one sitting there, which is from Adam. Do I want my journal to go to my mentor or supervisor, etc.?
That's optional. So it depends on the topic that you're doing. So by default, your journal just goes to you. But depending on the topic that you're doing, yeah, you actually may want it sent to a manager or coach, because it might be something that they're involved in post-training follow-up. It might be that the very first activity is have a meeting with your manager to discuss what you've done. So there are different ways you can do that. You can also tag different stakeholders, like an assessor or someone that's involved in that particular activity, or no one. It might just be yourself. Kerry, I might just sum up and then I'll hand over to let you keep going, because I pretty much covered most of the things that I want to cover here today. I'll just flick back to my slides for like literally 2 seconds. The only thing I didn't look at was post-polling, but that's pretty straightforward. It's asking a bunch of evaluation polls, all those Kirkpatrick things I was just talking about. The great thing is they're really easy to do online. And because they're all stored online, data is much easier for you to actually analyze your training. So if we think about these steps, we're defining the objective, which helps you get the hard edges, define your scope, figure out what data you want. We're defining the ROI for you to determine the appropriate effort you want to put in to match the return that you're looking for. You're then deciding if this is a 1-stage or 2-stage process, because sometimes you just need to work on your content a bit more before you go any further. Once you've got your content ready, you're then going to essentially prepare the structure. What are the chunks? So you're looking at your content, thinking what's the individual elements they're going to become? Where am I going to put in the hard lines for each of my points? How am I going to bundle my points up into a module? How am I going to bundle those modules up into a topic and into a pathway? I'm going to start with the smallest possible conversion, because I'm going to learn a lot. It's an iterative process. It's going to evolve. I'm going to make mistakes. Let's keep the eye as small as we can. And then, as we've seen today, there's lots of ways to take traditional workshop instructional design and put it into online training, even before I get into stuff that you can only do online. Today, I was really focused on that conversion part without having to go into dedicated online stuff. I'm going to pause there because I've just gone slightly over time, and I know we have other speakers today, and I'll get yelled at if I go for too much longer. Kerry, are there any final questions there that I should cover at the moment?
No, no more questions. I think there was just one comment about they like the things that this platform is capable of doing, David. So my hat's off to you, because I know one of our long-term members, also Jeff Ripp, is a big advocate of your platform, and he's all about design and return. And he comments about how you're one of these people who constantly seeks feedback, constantly evolves, and improves the platform. So he can't speak highly enough of this platform. And I think you've taken something which tends to overwhelm members, like where do I start, what do I do, and you've chunked it down to make it a really practical process. So even if they don't use your platform, which we hope that they will, because it's a great platform, but some really great tips on how to design workshops as well.
I appreciate that, Kerry. You've done my ego no end of wonders with that. So look, I haven't really spoken about our platform today, because the things, or some of the things that we've done here, you can do in other learning platforms. Some of it's a bit harder in other platforms, but the concept should be the same, that you can apply in a range of different tools, no matter what you're using. I'm going to get out of the way, but I am going to linger in the background. And when the session finishes, I will hang around. Also, if anyone wants to send me private messages in chat, feel free to do that, and I'll answer you all back in private messages as we're going. Or else, thanks for having me, and I'll see you again in the future.
All right.